Some people recently have suggested that I switch things up with my YouTube channel and try some new things and so on. So, with that in mind, I will now embark on a long, dry, monotone diatribe about some niche topic in political philosophy. So, hopefully, you'll all appreciate that. So, anyways, as is well understood by anyone with any degree of familiarity with political philosophy or with just politics in general, there's no shortage of disagreement among different kinds of leftists. There are lots of well known intra left wing debates, ranging from such issues as the proper approach to political strategy to what exactly a truly just society might look like in practice. Despite this wide range of disagreement, most leftists are nonetheless united by certain convictions. Leftists are pretty unanimously united, for example, by a belief in the injustice of capitalism and class society. Moreover, I believe that most leftists are united by certain fundamental moral convictions which drive them to the belief that capitalism and class society are unjust. The most fundamental of these moral convictions, I believe, is a commitment to egalitarianism. There are at least two relatively common and relatively crude misinterpretations of egalitarianism that I often hear from, I guess, more unsophisticated critics of egalitarian ideas. The first misinterpretation is that, according to egalitarians, people are all equal in every respect. Of course, critics of egalitarianism will confidently proclaim, nobody would deny that people are different in various ways. Some people are smarter, some people are stronger, some people are more creative, some people are more productive, and so on. It's clearly unreasonable, therefore, to assert that all people are equal. That's what a critic of egalitarianism might say. Another misinterpretation is that, according to egalitarians, people should be made equal in terms of all kinds of outcomes. This is the kind of misinterpretation that causes people to assert that leftists want complete equality of outcome, whatever that means. Just imagine the degree of authoritarian control that would need to be exerted in order to make everybody completely equal in terms of their income, their happiness, and so on. This is neither feasible nor desirable, critics of egalitarianism might say. Of course, as was previously noted, both of these interpretations of egalitarianism are caricatures. While egalitarians believe that people are equal in some fundamental sense, they do not believe that people are equal in every sense. While egalitarians believe that people should be equal along some dimension, they do not believe that people should be equal along every dimension. Most egalitarians, for example, are more than willing to grant that there will be some variations in well-being, income, and so on between different people in a fully just and equal society. So, we're now left with a few questions. In what sense are we all equal from the egalitarian perspective? In what sense should we all be made equal from the egalitarian perspective? What is the relationship between the egalitarian claim that we are all equal in some specified sense and the claim that we should all be made equal in some other specified sense? How does this all relate to the value of equality in the distribution of resources? I will now make an attempt to provide a brief sketch of an answer to these questions, using a framework for thinking about egalitarianism known as relational egalitarianism, which was provided by the political philosopher Elizabeth Anderson in her paper, What is the Point of Equality? I should note, of course, that Elizabeth Anderson's construal of egalitarian thought is not the only construal on offer, but I think that it is a fairly powerful one that captures a lot of what leftists find detestable about the systems that they oppose. So, in setting up how we should think about egalitarianism, it's important to consider some historical context with regards to how egalitarian political movements have functioned throughout history. More specifically, it's important to consider how egalitarian political movements have historically conceived of their aims. What systems have egalitarians historically opposed on the basis of their inegalitarian nature? It seems as though the inegalitarian tendencies which egalitarians have historically positioned themselves in opposition to are distinguished by their inclination to assert the justice or necessity of basing social order on a hierarchy of human beings who are ranked according to their intrinsic worth. Inegalitarian movements push for a society wherein people are sorted into superior and inferior statuses. Those people who are classified as superior are therefore entitled to inflict violence on inferiors, to exclude or segregate them, to treat them with contempt, to force them to obey, to force them to work without reciprocation, and to force them to abandon their own cultures. These are precisely the types of relations that the egalitarian political philosopher Iris Young has identified as the faces of oppression. These faces include marginalization, exploitation, domination, status hierarchy, and cultural imperialism. Egalitarian political movements historically have opposed these types of social relations, that is, social relations of oppression. If inegalitarian tendencies are distinguished by their belief in differences in intrinsic value between people, as well as their corresponding belief that society should grant some people a superior status and allow them to oppress the inferiors, egalitarianism expresses just the opposite set of convictions. Egalitarians believe, then, that all people are of equal intrinsic value, and that therefore nobody should be in a position where they have the capacity to oppress others. Let's now consider these two convictions of egalitarian thought in turn. So, the claim of equal value. According to egalitarians, all human beings are of equal intrinsic moral worth. Of course, this is not to say that all human beings are of equal virtue or talent. As Elizabeth Anderson points out, the egalitarian commitment to the equal moral worth of all people has a positive component as well as a negative component. Negatively, the claim repudiates distinctions of moral worth based on circumstances of birth or social identity. The egalitarian denies that someone's moral worth varies based on their family membership, their inherited social status, their race, their ethnicity, their gender, or their genes. According to the egalitarian, there are no natural slaves, plebeians, or aristocrats. Positively, the egalitarian asserts that all competent adults are equally moral agents. In other words, all competent adults equally have the power to develop and exercise moral responsibility, to cooperate with others in a just fashion, and to define and pursue their own concept of the good. Because egalitarians believe that all human beings are of equal intrinsic moral worth, egalitarians believe that all human beings are entitled to social and political equality. This claim of social and political equality also has a positive and a negative component. Negatively, egalitarians repudiate and strive to eliminate oppression. In other words, egalitarians strive to eliminate forms of social relationships wherein some people dominate, exploit, marginalize, demean, and inflict violence upon others. These relations of subjugation cannot be justified by differences in people's socially ascribed identities, their roles in the division of labor, their personal traits, etc. Positively, egalitarians seek to establish a social order in which people stand in relations of equality, i.e., where people relate to each other as equals. Egalitarians wish for people to live together in a democratic community as opposed to a hierarchical one based on oppression. By democratic, Anderson clarifies that she means collective self-determination by means of open discussion among equals in accordance with rules acceptable to all. Furthermore, to stand as an equal before others, according to Anderson, means that you are free to participate, that others recognize an obligation to listen to your arguments respectfully and to respond to them, and that you do not need to bow and scrape before others or represent yourself as inferior to others as a condition of having your claims heard. It should now be clear why this account is a relational account of egalitarianism. Anderson's account treats equality as a social relationship. By equality, Anderson means a state of affairs where nobody is able to wield power over and oppress their fellow humans, and where humans cooperate together as equals to determine the terms and structure of their social cooperation, including how the benefits and burdens which are produced by our social cooperation are to be distributed, and so on. By contrast, think of other proposed accounts of egalitarianism. Many such accounts value equality as a pattern of distribution of some desideratum. On these views, two people are equal insofar as they are equal in terms of their material resources or their welfare or something like this. Now, it's worth noting that very few people actually hold to the equality of welfare view, but I'm just using it as an example. On these views, social relations are seen as instrumentally important due to their capacity to produce the desired distribution of the specified desideratum. Anderson's account is fundamentally concerned with the social relations that people stand in. On her view, two people are equal when each accepts the obligation to justify their actions by principles acceptable to the other, and in which they take mutual consultation, reciprocation, and recognition for granted. To make all this a bit more concrete, let's take some paradigm examples of oppressive social relations that egalitarians oppose. Under capitalism, capitalists exert power over workers, which they use to facilitate the exploitation of workers. Because capitalists own the means of production and workers do not, workers must work for capitalists, and capitalists get to determine how much the worker works, how they work, under what conditions they work, how much they get paid for their work, and so on. Of course, the capitalist uses this power to ensure that workers get paid as little as possible for as much work as possible. This is a paradigm case of exploitation. We have a group of people who wield economic power over other people, and they use that power to benefit themselves at the expense of the other people. Or, for another example, take the patriarchy. In most modern societies, men by and large control all of the important levers of power. They have more economic power than women, they're more represented in government than women, they hold more cultural power than women, etc. It is, then, mostly men who determine how men and women relate to each other in society, what roles they fulfill, and so on. This is another paradigm case of domination. A similar story can be told about racism. White people control the relevant levers of power in society to a greater degree than black people, and they use that power to disadvantage black people in various ways. Black people are more economically disadvantaged, they are disproportionately targeted by the criminal justice system, and so on. So hopefully now we can see how the same fundamental moral conviction motivates the positions of leftists on all of these various issues: racism, sexism, capitalism, and so on. Okay, so if egalitarians are to be fundamentally concerned with the social relations that people stand in, what are they to say about inequalities in the distribution of goods? Why would a relational egalitarian care that wealth and income flows overwhelmingly to a tiny section of society while millions live in squalor? As I said earlier, relational egalitarians certainly will not necessarily be concerned by any inequality in the distribution of goods. That said, egalitarians certainly are concerned about many inequalities in the distribution of goods. As I see it, this is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, inequalities in the distribution of goods, when large enough, can produce social relations of oppression. It is not hard to see why this is. When some have lots of money and resources and others do not, this creates a circumstance wherein the haves can use their money and resources as a bargaining chip to get the have-nots to submit to their wills. Consider, for a small-scale example of this phenomenon, an abusive husband who, because he makes a lot of money and his wife makes very little, is able to get his wife to stay with him and endure his abuse due to the risk of falling into poverty that she faces if she left him. This is a clear case of exploitation, which is enabled by large inequalities in the distribution of goods. Secondly, inequalities in the distribution of goods often follow from unequal social relations or relations of power imbalance and domination. For instance, almost all of the economic inequality which we see in today's society is a result of the fact that a small section of society owns and controls the means of production. Because a small privileged group controls the flow of resources, they allocate as much as possible to themselves, as little as possible to workers, and none to those who do not or cannot work. The capitalists using their power to benefit themselves at the expense of everybody else in society is a paradigm act of domination and exploitation, and this domination and exploitation is the reason for the rampant economic inequality that we see in society. Of course, not all conceivable economic inequalities are products of domination or exploitation or oppression. For example, if in a socialist society citizens democratically as a community decided that some jobs were much more pleasant than others and that it was therefore okay to give a little more money to those who do the harder jobs as an incentive, this does not disturb the egalitarian. Furthermore, if a socialist society democratically decided to give a little more money to those who worked longer hours, and people who chose to work more thereby got more money, while people who preferred to have more leisure time got a little less money, this does not disturb the egalitarian either. These are inequalities which emerge from a context of relational equality and democracy, and which therefore are the result of a fair and voluntary agreement between all parties, including those who wind up with less money as a result of the arrangement, rather than being the result of an initial power imbalance. And furthermore, so long as these inequalities are not allowed to grow large enough, they are unlikely to lead to any significant power imbalances between members of society. In summary, while relational egalitarians do care about the unequal distribution of goods, they care about this when and because that distribution either causes, or is the result of, or is constitutive of an unequal social relation. In other words, on the relational egalitarian view, goods must be distributed in accordance with principles and processes that express respect for all people. A distribution of goods is good or bad insofar as it is arrived at in this way. As Elizabeth Anderson puts it, democratic egalitarians are fundamentally concerned with the relationships within which goods are distributed, not only with the distribution of goods themselves. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about, relational egalitarianism itself. But I want to now embark on a brief tangent and discuss the relationship between freedom as a fundamental value on the one hand and equality as a fundamental value on the other hand. The relationship between freedom and equality is of great importance in contemporary political discourse. Indeed, many people view the debate between socialists and capitalists as a debate about what's more important between the conflicting values of freedom and equality. Of course, on this common conception, socialists are taken to represent the equality side, and capitalists are taken to represent the freedom side. One who defends a relational egalitarian view might be tempted to say that equality and freedom just end up being the same thing. To be free just is to be equal in the sense specified by relational egalitarianism, one might say. Remember, on Anderson's view, equality represents the negation of oppressive social relationships. Equals, for example, are not subject to arbitrary violence or physical coercion by others. And isn't choice, unconstrained by physical coercion, a fundamental condition of freedom? Equals are not dominated by others. Equals, in other words, do not live their lives at the mercy of others' wills. This means that equals get to live their lives in a way which is guided by their own wills and their own conceptions of the good. Is that not all freedom means? So, against both of the views that I've just outlined regarding the relationship between equality and freedom, against, on one hand, the view that equality and freedom are these sort of conflicting values that are represented by different sides of the political spectrum, and against the view that equality and freedom just end up being the same thing. I believe that freedom and equality are tightly connected, but I believe that they are different and mutually irreducible values nonetheless. As I have said, equality is relational. Equality involves certain relations that you stand in with other people. Freedom, on the other hand, refers to one's absolute ability to impose their own will and live life how they want without constraint. Very often, the thing which constrains our ability to live how we wish is a social relation or multiple social relations of domination. For example, if I can't get a tattoo or speak out about some political belief that I hold because my employer will fire me if I do so, then my freedom is being restrained by a social relation of domination. But not all constraints on my freedom are social relations of oppression. Nature, for example, is often an impediment to my freedom in various ways. I believe, then, that the correct thing to say about the relationship between freedom and equality is this. Freedom and equality are different values. However, having more equality pro tanto increases my freedom. Therefore, one motivation for believing in equality is that freedom is valuable, and that establishing equality, i.e., eliminating social relations of oppression, promotes freedom. I believe, then, that freedom and equality are different fundamental values, that both are intrinsically valuable in their own right, and that freedom gives us extra reason to value equality, because inequality is one of the biggest impediments on people's freedom, in the sense of equality which I've defined in relational egalitarian terms. Okay, so that's all I had to say about that. Now comes the point in the video where I give an obligatory shout out to all of my $10 patrons, that being Schnicken, NDNW, Julius Conan, and Isocratic. Thank you to everybody who supports me. If you want to support me, I will link my Patreon in the description to this video. If you join my Patreon for $10, you get access to exclusive articles that I write for patrons, as well as basically article versions of all the videos that I will be making going forward, as well as I will say your name at the end of all of my videos. And if you just sign up for $5, then you basically just get the articles that I previously mentioned. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much it. Goodbye, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video.